Right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the SSEES HPE History, Politics and Economics Taster Session. My name's Lisa Walters. I work in the admissions team for SSEES. I'm joined by Katerina, who also works in admissions with me. And we're joined today by Dr. Tom Lorman, who's Associate Professor in Hungarian History and the Programme Coordinator for History, Politics and Economics. Also joined by Dr. Peter Braga, who's our admissions tutor and a lecturer in post-Soviet politics, and Alice Dove, who's the programme administrator. So three very important people who you will all be dealing with if you choose to come to SSEES. So we've got about half an hour for Dr. Lorman and Braga to introduce the programme, and we're going to give you a little taster session, just a sample lecture of some of the things you might encounter on this very, very popular and exciting degree programme. And then there'll be plenty of time at the end for Q&A. So you can pop any questions in the chat as we're going along. We will choose to call some of them out and answer those live, but my colleagues may also be typing and answering those as we go. So I'll hand over to Dr. Lorman now, and I hope you enjoy the session. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Lisa, and thank you to all of you for taking the time out from busy lives in the run-up to the big winter holidays to attend this webinar. And what I want to say is that basically the School of Slavonic and East European Studies, where HPE is based and where I am currently sitting, is a big school within UCL. There's almost 90 people here teaching in various things: history, politics, economics, and the languages and culture of the region. And of those 90, most of us deal with specific countries or regions within what we call Central and Eastern Europe. That's that area roughly from Berlin all the way to Vladivostok, right? Vast area of territory. In which over 500 million people live. And that's our core focus. We do have a few colleagues, particularly in the economic section, who work on more theoretical questions and who are not area-based. They look at questions of inequality, of gender, of transition, that have a relationship to various case studies they use from around the world. So we're an interesting mix of people dealing with what we might call these four key tracks: economics and business, politics and sociology, history, politics and economics, history, and languages and culture. And here's the key thing: when you come to SSEES to study with us, you can tap in to every one of the people teaching at SSEES's expertise. They're always here. Even if they're away for a bit, they'll be back, and they look forward to teaching you and talking. And of course, you have that wider expertise of UCL, one of Britain's biggest universities and one of the top universities in the world, which you can tap into as well. So it's really a twofold thing. It's about expertise that you can tap into. And what I thought today would be really helpful for you would be to just give you a taste of one of those 90 academics who teaches at the school, Peter Braga, who is what we would call a political scientist. His primary focus is politics, though of course he's interested in history, he's interested in culture, he's learned a number of languages. Maybe you can try and guess what languages he speaks. And he's also, among the various hats he wears, the deputy head of the HPE program, and someone you'll be dealing with. And so, without further ado, I'm going to ask Peter to just give you a taste of how a lecture at SSEES would be. Remember, of course, that you've got a choice of people that you study with at SSEES. There's lots of different lecturing styles. We also have not just lectures, but also tutorials and seminars and workshops. And even I get confused sometimes about the precise differences between them all. But to give you just a taste of one, here's over to Peter. And then at the end of his taster lecture, both himself and myself, and I'm sure others, will be welcome to answer questions that you might have or put them in the chat, in the Q&A as we go along. So without further ado, Peter Braga.
Hello, Tom. Thank you so much. Would you mind to turn off your speaker there so we lose the echo? That would be wonderful. But thank you for that tremendous introduction. I don't know if anybody can see me. I can't see myself. Excellent, people can. That's wonderful. But yeah, so today I'm going to give you a lecture, or at least kind of again a taster lecture of the kind of it's going to be condensed, a lecture on the type of lecture that you'd get when you're studying politics as part of HPE. Okay, so now I'm going to try and share my screen, but I don't know where the button is to do. Oh, share, it's bright and green. Fantastic. Okay, here are all my slides. Now I just will have changed it, I believe. And now can I just get confirmation from people that I'm sharing my screen? Is that correct for the lecture slides?
I
People see
can't
them?
see it yet.
Okay, I'll try again. So I'll click it and then, oh, I didn't press the share button. There we go. Now, is that,
It's
can people
something's
see that?
loading. Yep, there we go. We can see.
Tremendous. Excellent. Okay. So, so today's lecture is on regime change, which is very exciting, you know, revolutions and things, and the more stuffy political science part, because yes, there's theory and things like this, and executive systems. Okay, and I am lecturer of post-Soviet politics here at SSEES. Okay, so now we're going to be skipping over some of this content, but basically I have this sort of thematic introduction, and then we have the more sort of hardcore political science bits at the end. As far as I understand, you guys can have access to these slides. So let's start off with this life under late socialism, right? And when I'm organized, I usually like to have a list of things I want you to take away from the lecture. I start with this so that people can keep in your heads the various things I want to get across to you. Again, I'm running through this quickly, but basically, socialism provided sort of many things for citizens, right? You know, socialism wasn't just something thought up by people who wanted to be mean or something. It did a lot for society, okay? But it was repressive, and there were shortages. Socialism, right? There was superpower competition, lots of anxiety, right? And then we get into this, when you're thinking about transformation away from socialism, you know, what kind of systems did various societies choose? And in fact, they did choose a specific called semi-presidentialism, right? We won't get so much into that, but we'll also look at just systems in general. Which system is better? Parliaments, you know, parliamentary systems, or presidential systems, or semi-presidentialism. Okay, so this is all the kind of stuff we're flying through today. Okay, so this is just to quickly give you an idea of what life was like, right? During communist regimes before the revolutions of 1989. Right? This is late socialism, right? Stalin had died 5th of March, 1953, right? They shut down the gulags, okay? Hard labor and murder, right, under Stalinism, was replaced with leisure and consumption, right? And here we have an image of one of these more reform-minded communists, right? Nicolae Ceausescu, right? And there was a thaw between East and West, and now people, as long as you didn't criticize the system, right, you were sort of left alone. It was less repressive than it was before, right? And then we even, you know, late socialism, consumer culture was encouraged, right? And here we have a picture of this East German Trabant. And then we even have this image of sort of consumerism, right? This woman is sort of now a nod to feminism, right? Lady leading the way while they're able to buy stuff. You know, you have malls and things where you can go do your shopping. And, but if people stepped out of line, right, the state often reacted harshly, right? These two photos are of Hungarian protesters in 16th of June, 1988. Right? The two photos are taken actually one after the other around the same time, right? On the right here, we have János Kiss, right? About to have his head smashed in by police, right? And then he's on the left-hand side there when they're coming up to him. And on the right-hand side, we have a very young Viktor Orban, the current prime minister of Hungary, who's trying to go help his friend from from being beaten, right? And they had basically gone to commemorate someone's grave from the 1950 revolutions in Hungary, and even going there to commemorate, to stand next to it, to take to say a few words. The state cracked down on this, right? And if you step out of line, if you protest the system, they crack down. Okay, and and there were here's an actual letter, right, from a poor person in Romania writing to their pen pal, right? And we'll look at what they're saying in the next slide, right? And here, here's proof that people protested the system, right? In their letter, they're showing their willingness to rebel, right? Do we have freedom here? No, no, no. The letter from the previous slide. Do we love each other? No, no, no. Right? And do you remember the guy earlier, Ceausescu, from the slide that we had? This reformer of late socialism. Well, this was one of the letters that his secret police intercepted. And when this kind of thing happens, right? Well, the regime would crack down on it. And what would happen to this young person? You know, they were likely denied the right to go to university. They were not allowed maybe to ever travel abroad again. They were barred from a well-paying job. So the system had provided you with things, but would also respond very harshly in late socialism, right? Okay, and then we have late communism. We have all these shortages, what it doesn't manage to provide, right? And the imbalances were surreal, right? Energy was cheap and squandered, right? At the same time, you get these weird, socialism can produce lots of some things, but not lots of other things. 1 ton of oil costs the same as a single pack of sought-after Marlboro cigarettes, right? So just really bizarre, when you get a command economy. I also wanted to talk about the anxiety. I don't know if we have time. I had a little quiz made up. Maybe you can do it by yourself afterwards, but about the anxiety of nuclear annihilation at this time, right? These bombs that there's a website of the history of nuclear rivalry between the West and the Soviet Union, right? One contemporary nuclear bomb that we have today, that the average US size, the Russia size are slightly bigger, and this was the size they're making around the time of the Cold War. One thermonuclear weapon is 300 Hiroshimas. Okay, that's the current average size. There are much bigger ones. There are missiles that carry 36 of these things, right? And they all go off at once, right? So people are nervous during this time that there could be a massive war with 36 nuclear warheads stuck on a single missile kind of, going off, right? So there's anxiety too. And then we have the collapse of the Berlin Wall, right? We have all sorts of people going out, and the system starts to end, right? And they're celebrating the transition of power away from a socialist system, right? And we get these wonderful quotes, right? Václav Havel, people, your government has returned to you. And then there are also people who are nervous. The worst, what's going to happen after communism? The worst thing about communism is what comes after, Adam Michnik is saying, right? And so we're going to quickly take a peek at that. What did people do? Okay, and so now we're getting into the more nerdy political science element. How am I doing for time here, guys?
You're all good. You've got about 15, 20 minutes, Peter. So.
Okay, great. So I'm moving. I know I'm moving quite fast, but so we get into this democratization period, right? And the big question is who cares, right? What will political science provide you that history, right? That the history that we looked at, and also economics and stuff, what does politics provide you, okay? Political science often seeks to explain the causes of political events. Some argue history, right, is just one damn thing after another, right? And economics is tied to and often forced to react to political things, political decisions, right? And so while there's overlap between the disciplines of history, politics, and economics, right? Politics gives you a whole different set of tools to analyze and explain developments in human societies. Indeed, political science uses data and approaches from both history and economics, right? And to be clear, political science is not sort of better than history or economic perspectives. History, politics, and economics are all within the social sciences, right? Which politics is a part of. The difference is in political science's approach to methods, right? It's often based on the scientific method, specifically to seek and understand and explain the causes of key political events, such as the collapse of socialism, such as regime change, right, and democratization. And this is how our political science lectures matter. Okay, and so transition is maybe not even the best word at this point when we're moving from socialism to capitalism and democracy, right? It's more about transformation, right? In 1989, after these communist societies, right, they have there's a sort of a triple threat, three things that are happening all at once within these societies, right? We have economic transition, shifting from a centrally planned economy, which had all those shortages that we briefly saw those slides of for a second ago, and shifting to a free market. Then we had nation building from these imperial, the Soviet Union, and then the Soviet bloc or the Eastern Bloc countries, this kind of empire, right? Shifting from this imperial model to a modern nation state. And then we have a political change, right? From autocracy to competitive democracy. So these huge changes, right? And why do we study this stuff at SSEES? Why do I spend my time studying this stuff? Is because these transformations in 1989, they happen all across the Soviet Union and the bloc countries, right? And it happens all at once. And it's almost like a laboratory experiment, right? We're still coming back to this time because it's so unique within world history, right? And to carry out political science type of studies, right? And so when we get regime change, we have to think about there's this other thing, the executive, who rules, right? And they had a choice, right? So we have the big macro question, right? Do we want democracy or non-democracy? Well, they tried non-democracy. So during they did that during communism, right? So let's try democracy. And then we have this middle level question. They're not the biggest one. The middle level question is, well, what type of democratic government do we want, right? And we're going to look at the second question in detail, right? What kind of political system did these countries choose? And after they decided, right, the right executive system, then we have these micro level questions. Okay, well, what kind of voting rules do we want? We're going to focus on this meso choice, right? This middle, what system do we want? Okay, so now I'm not going to get into this. So if this was a normal lecture, we had the full time, we discuss, well, what is a political executive, right? What are these things? But I'm going to pop through these slides and get to the more interesting ones. Here, by the way, just some examples of heads of states, right? Different systems, right? In a prime minister system, right? We have the head of government, right? The prime minister. They're going to do the down and dirty politics, right? And thankfully, we have, yeah, or you know, you can notice my accent. I'm not from the UK, right? But in the UK, they have a head of state, a ceremonial person who doesn't have to do the difficult, dirty politics. We have King Charles III, right? Looking very dapper. And it's true that Tom has this picture in his office. I'm actually looking at it right now. It's on the wall. I got inspired. I chose this one in particular, right? And so you have two different ones, right? The guy who does the dirty politics, and then the other one who is kind of the spirit of respect for the state, right? And it's been replicated. Here we have a semi-presidential system. This is another type of system, right? That they have in the Czech Republic. And we have this rather geeky looking guy who does the real politics, right? The prime minister, Peter Fiala, right? But then we have this absolutely dashing head of state, Piotr Pavel, right? Look at that, you know, you look at that haircut and that beard. You want this? This is the guy who shows up at events. He looks good. This is what you want, right? You have these two things. And now we have, this is the semi-presidential system kind of artificially replicates this splitting of the head of state and the head of government, right? And then we have other systems, right? Oh, yeah, he's still head of state, right? But in presidential systems, these two things are combined into one, right? That's one of the difficulties, or one of the interesting things about presidential systems, and we're going to look at this, right? Is that you have the head of state who has to represent sort of the pride and the respect of the nation, right? But also, this person is the head of government who has to do the dirty politics. So you can't be a geeky looking guy. You kind of have to be the best of everything in presidential systems, right? And so at transition, these different governments within Central and Eastern Europe had to pick, okay, which one do we choose, right? Do we choose a prime minister system, right? Do we pick a semi-presidential system where you have a president who's elected, but then also a prime minister? Or do we do a presidential system? Which one do we do, right? And to carry on, right, now more sort of particular stuff here that we're going to run over. I would have told you how each system worked, right? The semi-presidential system, the parliamentary system, right? Funny things that can happen, right? This is kind of happening in France as well at this time. We might have cohabitation where the president will be from one party, but the prime minister will be from another. This is kind of what can happen in these semi-presidential systems, right? Now, here is a look at what the various countries chose, okay? Here are all the post-Soviet states. The reason why we focus on semi-presidential system, right, in the SSEES region, right, is look at all the different countries that chose a semi-presidential system where we have an elected ceremonial head of state like Piotr Pavel, you know, that guy with the great haircut and the beard. And then we have also, these countries will have a prime minister who's supposed to do the down and dirty politics, right? Now, so who cares? Why should you care if I've shown you all this stuff about the different systems and what they elected, right? It's because constitutional regime type, that whether you pick presidential, mixed system. So in this this graph, right, we have the systems that chose parliamentary systems in the world. Okay, the countries that choose the semi-presidential system, the mixed one in the middle, and then the countries that chose presidential systems, right? And those out of these countries, which are the ones that became authoritarian, which failed in their democratic experiment? And out of the countries that have transitioned to or chosen one of these systems, presidential systems tend to fail and become autocratic the most, okay? So presidential systems tend to be the worst performing for remaining democratic, right? And this is what we'd also dig into in our lecture. And we're going back now to a pillar of political science, this great political science, political scientist named Juan J. Linz. And he writes this great essay called The Perils of Presidentialism in the Journal Democracy for the first issue. They say, please, Juan J. Linz, in the Journal Democracy, can you write something special for our first issue about transition? And what is it that Marx said, Karl Marx? The point of the thing you have to do, it's not, philosophers have tried to describe the world, right? This is what Marx said. No, but the point is to change it. And this is what Juan J. Linz is trying to do in 1990. He's seeing all these countries. They're going to choose, you know, what political system. They're making this meso-level choice. Do we become a parliamentary system, semi-presidential, or presidential? And Juan J. Linz, in reaction to this other guy, Samuel P. Huntington and things like this, he writes this article basically saying, don't be presidential. Why is this, right? So in his famous / infamous paper, Linz criticizes several features of presidential systems. And I'll give a quick overview, right? First, presidential systems have competing sources of legitimacy. There are different electoral origins for both the executive, you know, the president, and the legislature, the guys who make all the laws, right? The president is, he's responsible to the people, right? They elected him in a specific election. But the legislature, right, the people who make the laws, they're responsible just to their constituency, right? So we have different, who's the president responsible to? Well, all the people in the country, or maybe a portion of them, right? But then the legislatures, well, they're in the presidential system, well, they're responsible to whomever picked them from their state, right? So we have this kind of split responsibility problem, okay? Another thing is that presidents have, right, they have fixed terms. They can only, it's hard, and it's very hard to get rid of these presidents once they've been elected, right? So you have that president more or less for the amount of time. As soon as they get elected, they're in, right? And it's very hard to get rid of them. You know, Trump, right? He's been impeached twice, and yet he's back, even in this presidential system, unbelievably, it seems, right? And third, there's this kind of winner takes all outcome, right? That once your guy is in, well, he's in, right? He's won it all. What happens to the other president? What happens to Kamala Harris? Does she get anything? Does she get a place in the government? No, nothing. Well, they're out, right? And this leads to bitter competition in presidential systems, right? And it basically, this bitter competition, what does it do? It can lead to bitter intolerance between one side for one president versus the other, right? And finally, Linz also says, right, that presidential systems can encourage populist candidates. All the way back in 1990, he's talking about this, right? That presidents have a direct relationship with their electorate, right? And thus, they want to promise the electorate anything they want. You know, this kind of thing. This is what can lead to in presidential systems. And thus, there's a certain logic to populism, right? You know what? Vote for me. I'll do exactly what you want. Everything will be great, right? And so, does this sound familiar? Trump is going to go drain the swamp. He's going to do all this kind of stuff. Everything's going to be great, right? You know what? It's tremendous, or whatever he likes to say, right? These are perils of presidentialism that Juan J. Linz warned about back in 1990 when he was watching all these transitions in Central Eastern Europe and the post, now becoming the post-Soviet space, right? And this is why the SSEES region can be so helpful and useful, because look at all this stuff that we're able to reflect on stuff today that's literally happening right now, right? And so also, okay, hold on, getting my notes. So Juan J. Linz also comments on parliaments, right? And so he tries to say that, look, in general, parliamentary systems, right, like in the UK, tend to be a lot more stable, right? You know what? If one MP doesn't become prime minister, well, they're still in the House of Parliament, right? It's they're still kind of within the political process a bit, and he has, I won't get into all of the reasons why he argues for parliaments, but he makes a warning. He says that if there's ethnic conflict, one group of people in the country doesn't like another group based on, various ethnic conditions about them. In general, in history, this is where parliamentary systems have really fallen down, right? And usually don't perform so well. Maybe you can think about this in the context of the UK, right? Okay, so then there's this counter argument to Haybub where he tries to say that, there are problems with Linz's argument. This is another thing that's great about political science. There's always debate. It's always changing, right? How are we doing for time, Lisa?
Couple more minutes, Max. I'd say there's quite a lot of questions in the chat.
Oh, Livoli, there's lots of
which I think
questions. This is
useful.
exciting. Okay. Yeah. So we have this guy Haybub, very famous political scientist. He tries to say, hey, your data is not great. That's always good. Always attack people's data. That's the easiest thing to do, usually. And he basically, this is a summary of Haybub's versus Linz's argument. I made a little image of this, right? But so basically, why does the SSEES region choose semi-presidentialism, right? But they basically see at the time, they're like, look, in some cases, we used to have a royal family, but the communists killed them, right? They're gone, right? So we don't have a royal family anymore. It would be weird to do a parliamentary system in a lot of cases, right? So they choose this thing where they get to have this head of state, and they also get to have parts of a parliament. So they're trying to get the best of both worlds, right? Which is why semi-presidentialism gets picked, right? And why when we study the SSEES region, it's essential that you know what semi-presidentialism is, right? And yeah, and is semi-presidentialism perilous, right? It tends to lead to this cohabitation, right? That we sometimes see in France, which might happen very soon, where we'll have a president from one party, but then a government from a different party, right? And then sometimes it can lead to deadlock because everybody's bickering, right? But safer, Linz says, than presidentialism. All right, and then so what do you think? Are you convinced by Linz's argument, right? Are presidential systems perilous for democracy? Which executive system do you think is better, right? Better for democracy? And do you think semi-presidentialism is workable if you get these weird imbalances of a completely different president having to work with a completely different party of government? I don't know. Up to you. All right. But thank you so very much.
Thank you, Peter. That was a really whistle-stop tour through that lecture. And there's a lot of questions actually in relation to the content. Tom, Katerina and myself have been answering quite a lot of program-based questions as we go. And I might just call out a couple of those that I often get asked from an admissions perspective once I've passed these over to Peter. But on the back of that lecture, Ramesh has asked, what are your views on Michael Parenti's take on Yugoslavia, particularly his take on America's privatization of their social services, in which he believed caused the breakdown of the Yugoslav identity and the state itself? Do you agree with his reasoning, or do you have any own opinions you may like to share? I appreciate it's a big question. Yes, it is. Question is open to both Thomas and Peter. Any thoughts, either of you?
You know what? Yeah, this is one of the absolutely tremendous thing about SSEES. I think Tom mentioned that there are 90 experts here. And we have a Yugoslav expert who's literally downstairs that I could go downstairs and speak with. I'm the lecturer of post-Soviet politics, right? That's my field, and that's the stuff that I really know about. Unfortunately, I don't feel confident enough to answer your question. But again, this happens quite a lot because we have this huge bodies of students who are really top notch. We have great students here. Last time I did this lecture, another student was speaking to me about Hungary and asking me all these questions and stuff, and I could answer some of them, and I couldn't answer others because I'm not an expert on Hungary. But I just wanted to say that the great thing is literally around the corner. You can ask that question, and I promise you the person would be able to answer you right away. So that's one of the great things about being here, right?
Thanks, Peter.
Yeah.
Someone else has asked, looking into the case of Armenia and from personal experience, the figurehead approach does not work. So my question is, how would we best decide which kind of system to choose?
How would we best decide? Yeah. And so Armenia has its own very, very specific, interesting history as well, which was largely disrupted and affected by the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, right? Whereby they started off on one track, but then the war sort of changed everything and made politics much more complex. And so it's fascinating that you're asking about Armenia, which again, I bet that even, and again, this is my personal opinion, right? That even if they had chose the best system, right? The effect of the Nagorno-Karabakh wars, right? Would have derailed any process. It was so powerful, and so the shift, the impact of that was so so major that any system would have struggled under it. Yeah. So difficult question for that one. Yeah.
Thanks. I mean, there's a couple more, but I'm going to just pick one at random about the lecture, and then we'll go on to some program-led questions as well. But Peter, are you happy for students to ask questions as a follow-up, perhaps after this lecture?
Absolutely. This is what I'm here for.
Perfect. Thank you. So someone's asked, what would be an alternative to fixed terms? Like, wouldn't presidents always be under threat of being taken down by the opposition? Or is there a country that already adopts unfixed presidential terms? I realize these are hard questions today.
Yeah. But again, this is one of the reasons why they had semi-presidential systems, right? Whereby you have a president who has certain responsibilities, and then you have the prime minister who has other responsibilities, right? Now, there are subtypes of semi-presidential systems, right? For example, Russia is semi-presidential, right? But the way that the constitution developed, it turned into a super semi-presidential system, where basically it in name is semi-presidential system. However, the president has way more power than anybody else, whereby the system no longer really functions that way. But then there are other systems where there are competing amounts of power between the president and the parliament. And so the answer to your question might be, again, I wouldn't know how to reconstruct like a presidential system into a semi-presidential one. But the nice thing about these semi-presidential systems is there can be a negotiation between who has how much power, what is your remit, right? Which kind of, again, trying to get the best of both worlds in difficult times. This is kind of why they picked the semi-presidential system. I know that's kind of a cop-out answer, but again, maybe look at some of dive into some of these theories. Yeah.
Thanks, Peter. That was really great. And some really great questions. It's really nice to have students that have really thought about the lecture content and asking those difficult ones. I'm going to pick up on a couple of themes that I'm seeing in some of the questions, and they're things that I get asked all the time about this program. So we've got a lot of people asking, is this solely focused on Eastern Europe? Tom, Peter, I don't know if you want to say a couple of words about that. I have put in the chat a link to the program handbook, and that will show you what kind of modules you can pick from. It will take you through to the module catalogue where you can read a bit more detail about those modules. You'll see some are very focused, others are more theoretical. But Tom, I don't know if you could perhaps say a little more on that topic.
Yeah, I'd be delighted. Just give me 1 minute. I'm just typing in an answer. Yeah, here's the thing. We at the School of Slavonic East European Studies, obviously we focus on most of us focus on Central and Eastern Europe, but we don't ask you to have a huge knowledge before you start. In fact, all we want you to be aware of is that a lot of us work on that region, and so a lot of your modules, not all of them, focus on Central and Eastern Europe. And you may think, wow, it's an interesting case study, or you might develop an interest in it, or you might use it as a comparative study, or you might, I mean, we're all thinking about parts of the region. We're thinking about Russia and the current political situation, but this is an interconnected world. And therefore, what we think is that if you develop some knowledge about Central and Eastern Europe, you can use it as a comparison, right? I'm a historian. I work on one topic I'm interested in is how communism took over in Central and Eastern Europe. Okay, that has a tremendous relevance to the quarter of the world's population who even today live in countries which are at least nominally communist. So looking at where communism comes from is really helpful. Also looking at where, for example, transition economies, and a lot of the world is transition economies, the BRICS, for example, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. That BRICS idea comes out of the transition that began with Peter's discussion in 1989 of economic transformation. And so what we do at SSEES is what we say to employers. We say, our students have a familiarity with elements of the Central and Eastern Europe. They've got a wider familiarity with the theory and practices of history, politics, and economics. And they are engaged with the wider world and unafraid of challenging themselves with new topics. We don't require you to have a starting huge knowledge of any country's history. My goodness me, I teach Hungarian history, and I don't expect even my third-year students to have too much knowledge of Hungarian history. It's a very confusing country. But what we will do, we'll give you some information. And as long as you're willing to read a book, attend the lectures, think about what we're saying, you'll pick up some knowledge, develop some expertise, which is really impressive for employers. We know that because when our graduate students go on to other universities, or on M8 master's programs, or they go on into both private and government employers, they may not directly be employed to do Central and Eastern Europe. But they know our students can deal with tough topics, engage with them, find something interesting in them, bring in some relevance, and use that information going forward. After all, what we're really teaching you is a skill set. The countries we look at are just the case studies.
Thanks, Tom. And I'm going to touch on personal statements as well, because there's been quite a few questions about this. So,
yeah, I mean, I just wanted to say here, I mean, maybe Peter would want to come in as well. I know how hard personal statements are. They are really hard. In an ideal world, we would much rather sit down and interview all of you. But that would involve you traveling up to London from all over the world, and it would take a lot of time on our side as well. Okay, so what we're asking for a personal statement is just, we trust you. We know it's hard. Just highlight some points where, when all things being equal, we can give you that extra step in, right? We want those high quality A levels. That's hard enough to achieve. And hats off to all of you, right? Because I won't even tell you what I got A level, but if I'd applied to SSEES back in the old days, they wouldn't have let me in. It's got harder, I know that. Congratulations on even saying I can hit that 3 A's or equivalent aspiration. But look, it's HPE. Maybe you haven't studied the H, the P, or the E. You can use a personal statement to say, I didn't do this at A level, but I've got a real interest in, I don't know, history. Yeah. you can tell us something that helps to flesh out your wider interest in HPE, because we're looking at people, and we know you may not have studied every aspect of it. You may not have studied Central and Eastern Europe, but do you have an interest in it? Or have you just noticed it? Why not? I've been the attention perhaps of the Russia-Ukraine war, or whatever. That can really help. And we're interested in well-rounded individual who can cope with the challenges of studying at a top university in the middle of London, right? That's a curious combination. How do you find it? And what makes you impelled to come and study in London University? Do you like reading? Are you curious about the wider world? What kind of newspapers and magazines do you read? The Economist, Financial Times? If not, why not? Giving a sense of you that makes us think, yeah, you know what, all things being equal, you sound like a student who is interested and motivated, and that's what we want. That motivation and interest. You love drama. Tell us about your love of drama. And say, well, you know, I love the drama, and I love the drama of a good lecturer, and I hear that UCL and SSEES has got some of the best dramatic lecturers around, whose lectures are like theatre performances. By the way, you're right. Doesn't mean you love them all, because my God, we don't always like every theatre performance, but it's always a performance. And so tell us that, right? Tell us that you're thrilled by a good lecture, that you like a good book, that you give us an example of what the kind of things that you find exciting. Because what we want you to do, and it's for our benefit and for your benefit, it's a win-win, is for you to come to us and be inspired. Yeah? And when we have students who are inspired, and we have a lot of students who are genuinely inspired, because we don't just do our regular teaching, right? We've got lectures, we've got workshops, we've got guest speakers, we've got events going on. We want you to take part in that. There's a huge number of societies at SSEES and UCL. We want you to take part in that. We want you to take part in student-teacher partnerships. We want you to be involved as representatives, giving us feedback. We want you to engage in feedback and surveys and questionnaires. We want you to come to our office hours and challenge us on the points we make and say, no, I don't agree with you. We want that. And that's the kind of student we're looking for, because that's a student who's grown during its time at UCL and at SSEES. Tell us in your personal statement why HPE is right, why School of Slavonic and East European Studies is the right thing for you, and why the cut and thrust of intellectual engagement at UCL will give you the chance to be inspired and inspire us with your commitment. Thank you. Lisa, maybe you've got more sensible, practical suggestions, but
No,
that's what I'm looking for.
I think you've summarized it really well, Tom. What I will say is that I see so many students stressing over personal statements, saying, should I put this in? Should I put that in? It is your chance to tell us about you, as Tom has said, what motivates you. We do like you to mention the region and to make reference to the region. It gives us a nod that you're interested in our programme. We all know you've got 4 other choices. You're applying for perhaps history and economics, politics and history at other universities, and you cannot tailor your statement just for our very unique course. But by mentioning in a line or two, as Tom has said, you know, Russia-Ukraine war is in the news every single day. That's a nod to us that you're interested in the kinds of things that we teach here, and that you would be someone who is going to be engaged with the modules that we teach at SSEES. So there's no magic formula to writing a personal statement. It really is about you being honest about who you are, what your interests are, and not being afraid to take a view. As Tom said, you know, don't just listen to everything or absorb everything you read as truth. We like students that question. And that
don't just say here, I just out of curiosity, I asked ChatGPT what the perfect personal statement would be. And so I looked it up and I thought, yeah, and I rejected it.
I was going to say, please, anyone on this call, do not use ChatGPT to write your personal statement.
Exactly.
You can tell when it's been done by ChatGPT.
Sincerity. It's about telling us who you are. And that sincerity as it comes across actually is a key selling point. That confidence to say, this is what I am. And we actually find that admirable. find that admirable. So yeah, come across with who you are. And the ultimate answer is, if you would say yes to yourself, we probably would as well. Yeah.
Well, I have to caveat that as well a little bit, because we only have 90 spaces on this course. Well,
That's true.
And we have about 800 applications. So I don't want to put the kind of mood down, but it is a competitive program, and A levels are really important as well. So
That's the key thing.
I'm not able to tell anybody. I get lots of emails telling me what grades you've got, what kind of subject areas. I can't say until we've received all of the applications whether or not you get an offer. We don't tend to make offers until the January deadline has passed, 29th of January for next year. We then look at everything collectively, and we'll offer to those top students. So unfortunately, we do have to reject students that are really, really strong. And we're happy to provide feedback, but it won't be specific because of the volumes of applications. But if you meet, or you predicted to meet the 3A requirement, I'd very much encourage you to apply, because we don't know until January what the applicant pool is going to look like each year. But yeah, as much as Tom and the rest of us would love to take all 800 applicants, we obviously keep the course to a size that is manageable, so you get a good experience too. I just want to, because Alice is a very important person that you're going to deal with when you arrive at SSEES. Alice, is there anything that you would like to say to students that you perhaps wish they would do before they arrive in September, or anything that was going to help them settle into the course that you can think of?
I think the main thing is to read the student handbook that Lisa has linked in the chat. It will take you to all of our module catalogue descriptions. It will give you a really good idea of what you can expect. Not only gives you an overview of all of the modules available in SSEES, we also send out a reading list as well. So we don't expect you to read everything. That's not quite possible, but we do ask that you familiarise yourself with some of the reading lists, particularly if you're not strong, for example, in history. You might want to focus on doing some history pre-reading before you start. And don't worry too much about things like module selections. We hold a number of sessions at the beginning of the year. I spend a lot of time on module selections with students. There's a lot of help available. So don't worry about that too much, but just do some pre-reading first. And familiarise yourself with the program structure via the handbook. That's really important.
Thank you, Alice. We've only got kind of a few minutes left. We can't answer all of the questions, I think, in the chat, but hopefully we've covered, because a lot of them are similar, hopefully we've covered your kind of questions as best we can. This has been recorded, as we've said, so we will send the recording out to you all, and it will be on our YouTube channel as well. We'll also share Peter's slides if he's happy for us to do that, and our contact details as well. So if there's anything specific that you would like to get in touch and ask, that's what we're here for. If you do get an offer, you'll be invited to come and visit us in person, usually March or April at the school, and we'll have kind of a full afternoon where you'll meet Tom and Peter and the team again, and get to kind of go a little bit more in depth into the programme and whether it's the right fit for you. What we'll do is, a few people are asking about reading lists as well. On our website, if you go to the current students page, and then there's a tab for reading lists, and you can see this year's reading list. That is updated each summer, so there's no harm in you starting on those books, but I wouldn't encourage you to go and buy them all, obviously, because things might change and you need to get an offer first. But that will give you a good idea of some things you might want to do some preliminary reading on.
Sorry, sorry, Lisa. Just wanted to say, I think I saw someone raising their hands, but I can't see them anymore. So if there's any other question, I don't know if anyone else saw that. I didn't manage to.
I mean, the questions should be going in the chat, just because we can't unmute people, I don't think. But yeah,
okay.
If that's all, then we will wrap the session up. I can see a few of my colleagues are furiously typing in responses. But to everybody on the call, if you are going to apply, and we very much encourage you to do so, very best of luck, and we'll be in touch. And I hope you found this interesting. I've certainly learned something. So thank you everybody for joining us this afternoon, and special thanks to Tom and Peter for that fascinating lecture.